So I mean, I've thought a lot about the difference between propaganda and art. So art's actually a process rather than an end product. And with any luck, if you have a piece of art, the process is embedded in the byproduct. And so it reflects the process when you bring it into your house. And so it's an active, it's a crystallized act of exploration. And the real artist doesn't know what they're doing. They don't know what they're doing. They're exploring. I can recommend a film. There's a film made of Picasso in about 1957. And it was a black and white film. And it was actually a film of him making a painting. And he painted it on glass so you could see what he was doing. It's really quite fascinating because you can see that he's playing. He sketches it in and then he rubs it out. So then he sketches it in again and he rubs it out and he sketches over here. And it's like there's a real dynamism about it. He doesn't plan it out to begin with. Not that there's necessarily anything wrong with that as an artistic endeavor too. But Picasso was trying to explore and understand. And so someone who's a true artist doesn't have a political message. That's funny because my house is full of ideological propaganda from the Soviet Union. It's just packed full of it. And it's so interesting to watch these artifacts because a lot of them they're socialist realist, although mostly they're impressionist really. It's so interesting to watch them because in the painting themselves, there's a war that you can perceive. And the war is, a lot of the people who made these paintings were incredibly talented, really, really skilled because the Russians kept their formal academies open. So the Russians can really paint impressionism. It's remarkable, but their talents were encapsulated within this mostly Stalinist ideology. And so in each canvas there's this war between the ideological message and the artistic message. And what's so cool is the farther we get away from the Soviet Union, the more the art wins. Because in 300 years, there isn't going to be a shred left of that ideology. And all that'll be left of the paintings is the art. So
if there's a common problem that I see in storytelling today, it's that many are abandoning good artistic integrity in storytelling for the sake of an agenda or a narrative-driven tale with the intention of teaching you something. And gosh, is that just getting really old. I mean, how often have I heard people tell me, this was such an important film. This book had such important things to say. It's time for more media like this. You just need to listen. The theme was so progressive, yada, yada, yada. I would like to say this and write it in stone. Art has never been and should never be just about lecturing its audience, appeasing its audience, or just teaching its audience. Good art should always entertain first, because even the most basic, uneducational art there is will inevitably teach us something from it. Dr. Jordan B. Peterson, a psychologist and professor on the subject, stated that the best stories follow an archetypal pattern or framework that models itself on reality. That's why we can relate to it and identify with certain characters in stories, and why we often find life lessons within stories. Because by reflecting reality in its many layers, we see the lessons within it. You can often tell when a story is more agenda-driven or propagandistic-driven by when it breaks from the typical archetypical framework and thus detaches itself from the audience. After that, it's always up to the audience to decide if they even like the message or ideas being portrayed. An easy example would be Star Wars: A New Hope. Luke's story is a story we can not only follow easily, but very quickly connect to. He's a young man with dreams of leaving home, making something of himself and making a difference. He's passionate and good-natured, but immature, inexperienced, and a bit whiny. He's thrust into a galactic battle he barely understands, but immediately understands how crucial it is to succeed in it. His development from foolish farm boy to brave space pilot is present. His relationships built between Leia, Han, Ben Kenobi, R2, and 3PO are natural, well-placed, and make good sense. We see Luke and can see a piece of ourselves in his story. And perhaps we recognize a desire to escape our current circumstances as we felt or currently feel that same drive. Maybe we understand the necessity of our circumstances like Luke did when he joined the rebellion. Or maybe we identify with the rogue out for himself because that's who we were at one point. We understand that selfish drive. Or maybe we understand the aspect of faith in something greater than us like the Force. Or maybe we understand the idea of failing and trying to redeem ourselves like Ben Kenobi. All of these things very easily and naturally mirror something we can naturally connect to. This is the archetypal story at work, and from that story we can potentially take different lessons. I mean, what did you learn from Star Wars: A New Hope? I learned a lot of things. A lot of things I didn't go into the movie expecting to. And a lot of the things I'm not sure the movie intended to teach me. For some, you might have learned the importance of standing up to tyranny and oppression. Perhaps you learned the value of faith and how not everything can be explained through sight. Maybe the movie taught you about redemption and the idea that even the most selfish can be heroes. Maybe you learned that the world is far bigger than we often consider, or that destiny is actually a thing that can take hold for us if we try to pursue it. Note that none of these things might be exactly what the creators meant for it to be about, but nonetheless, your experience is your own, because as Peterson said, we can't know what the artist intended, nor does the artist tend to know, but they are creating something and we respond to it, feel something, or take something naturally, because it is, again, reflecting a perception of reality back at us that we respond to. But now let's compare that to the sequel series. I talk a lot about the sequel series, but I'm going to break it down for you in comparison to A New Hope. Can we identify with the sequel series in the same way we do with the original trilogy? Can we identify with Rey and Finn and Poe the same way we identify with Luke, Han, and Leia? Rey has been accused constantly of being a Mary Sue, and rightfully so, because she expresses no inherent flaws in her character. The only weaknesses attributed to her are that she is too nice, too forgiving. These are not character flaws, they are the equivalent of a humble brag. Rey is perfect in every respect. She is wiser, kinder, more generous without seeking compensation, more powerful, can draw strength and skills from seemingly nowhere with minimal effort, and never shows any great character growth in anything that she does. Even the quest to uncover her parents' identities is not in any way development for her character, as she literally abandons their names at the end of the series, adopting the name of the old cast like she somehow earned it. We cannot relate to perfection, and that is why the Mary Sue is often panned. The Mary Sue defies the archetypal story because we cannot relate to, nor can we identify with that which has no inherent weaknesses, flaws, goals, or ambitions, and lessons to learn. She's not real. There is no basis in reality. Finn potentially could have been a character to follow, but he and Poe both exist as mere plot points. They have a setup to potential character growth, but in the end exist to further the story of Rey. Han and Leia had development and growth despite Luke, but Finn and Poe have none. They are simply stand-ins, and that also does not meet an identifiable or relatable reality. Even if the story is not about them, they are still meant to be characters with their own ambitions, goals, and interests. A good way to think about it in any story is creating a side character or a group of side characters. You need to remember they don't just exist because the main character exists. They have their own stories and goals. Han Solo did not just exist to help Luke. He had his own personal stake in things. He had his own goals and ambitions. He had a drive. He had to sacrifice some things to help Luke, and that proved to be a problem for him later on because Jabba came after him. What can we say about that in terms of Finn and Poe? Almost everything they do works just to support Rey. Other than support Rey and topple the First Order, there is nothing driving these characters. What do they want? What do they enjoy? What do they hate? What do they seek? Where were they and where they wish to go? Sure, Finn wants to run away from the First Order at first, but then by The Last Jedi, he changes his motivations entirely to help fight the First Order for no real reason. I mean, it's never explained how this goes into his own personal goals. We don't see these characters evolve. We see them come in to make witty points or to be stand-ins, and that's kind of the end of it. But why? Why is the sequel bad and the old good? Certainly, we pan one and adore the other. But what does this have to do with anything? Because one is a story built by art. It is an artistic story. It is a creation. It follows the archetypal hero's journey. The other, you could consider propaganda. It's pushing a message. One sought to tell a story while the other sought to push a message. If you look up any video or article defending the sequel series, you'll often hear similar points. It's about female empowerment. Rey doesn't need men. The critics are just nostalgic Star Wars nerds. It's not meant to be taken seriously. It's a movie for kids about space wizards. It's about subverting your expectations. These points are either the key message that the movie creators wanted to push, the female empowerment thing being obvious, since women are the only ones who get things done in these movies, and the others are weak attempts from those who support this obvious agenda-driven message from having to acknowledge that the movie they liked is just agenda-driven nonsense. There's a reason why the original trilogy is still beloved to this day, and this new movie series is literally costing Disney money. But wait, I hear some ask, what's wrong with a little propaganda or pushing a narrative? What does that do to a story? Simple. The story will fade from memory or be forgotten. When the audience reads your story, they expect to be entertained. If the story is pushing a message to the point that the story cannot cover up that fact, then it will all depend on if the audience watching supports that message. If they do, then great. But if not, then expect them to walk away disappointed. But even if they support that message, quite often the desire for more of that message will be called for. The desire for more overt messages like it. For example, the movie Frozen. Some have speculated queer undertones in the movie because the obvious propagandistic message behind it was that women don't need men, that love can have many forms, and Elsa never even gets with a man, so she might be lesbian. Yeah, good luck with that. At the time I first saw the movie, I did find it enjoyable, but with time and further viewings, I grew less and less interested. It had lost the flair that so many better Disney movies had provided because the message was becoming more and more overt. And I didn't agree with it. But others did. And they began demanding it more. And more. And more. And as more stories push out this same message, the original story fades from memory. Shall I provide evidence? I asked you, my wonderful viewers, in a post to share your favorite Disney movies with me. Frozen was only mentioned once, and it was a secondary choice. More of you voted for ones like Treasure Planet, Atlantis the Lost Empire, The Aristocats, The Little Mermaid, Mulan, Beauty and the Beast. Guys, that's not coincidence. In fact, there was one comment that listed movies that they liked, both old classics and moderns, and even among the modern ones, Frozen doesn't get a mention. Is that not telling? Why has Frozen fallen? Because when it came out 7 years ago, everyone loved it. It was everywhere. The song Let It Go was on every radio station, and Elsa was being upheld as the greatest Disney heroine ever. But that's just the problem. The movie was only entertaining while the message was hidden behind pop songs, beautiful animation, and media approval. But with time, new movies have come to deliver the same message Frozen tried to push, and thus Frozen is being slowly pushed to the side. But the movies that were great, the movies that were more art than propaganda, the movies that sought to entertain through beloved archetypal characters, through powerful imagery, developed and strong characters, relationships that reflect reality and societal norms, and understandable, identifiable, and relatable aspects to tie us to their stories are the ones that have endured and are still loved. But of course, I know that I have a very unique audience. Most of my viewers are likely male, and would obviously have been more geared towards certain genres like Treasure Planet or Atlantis the Lost Empire, or maybe even Tarzan, as Treasure Planet and Atlantis the Lost Empire might have been movies that they saw as a child. I know, for example, one of the first movies I ever saw growing up was The Little Mermaid. It came out shortly after I was born, and I love that movie. But for some, they have connections to other great movies. So perhaps that's not enough evidence. Maybe you think, okay, look, we just grew up with these movies and we're male, so we're going to be more geared toward the action adventure stories. Is there more proof you can offer that Frozen isn't as good as we think it is, that it's fading? Here's something you might find interesting. Jordan Peterson, the psychologist I was just mentioning earlier, and the guy you saw in the first clip, says that he doesn't like Frozen because he believes it propagandistic. He believes that it is built around just pushing a narrative and that the story was wrapped around it. In an interview, Jordan Peterson argued that in 10 years, no one would be watching Frozen because it would fade. It's too propagandistic. The interviewer made a bet that in 10 years, if Frozen had not fallen from the top 20 Disney movies on IMDb, he had to make a public apology. I went to go check. This was released in 2018, so it isn't even that recent, but 2018. Let's give it that. And we'll also give them the courtesy of starting at 2013 when the movie came out. So from 2013 to 2018, that's 5 years. It was number 21. Not even 10 years yet. It's already below the top 20 spot. And no, it wasn't replaced with a bunch of new and more progressive movies. The top spots belong to older, more beloved movies like Spirited Away, The Little Mermaid, Aladdin, and my personal favorite Disney movie, Beauty and the Beast. Why? What made these stories rise above the fame of Frozen? because they did what Frozen didn't. Good stories create characters. Frozen created figures. Good stories create relatable, understandable tales that we can connect to reality. Frozen took a well-honored tale by Hans Christian Andersen and just repurposed it with a new message. Consider this for a minute. Mulan and Frozen could both be held up as strong women's stories where women didn't need men or anything like that. But consider this for a moment. All the characters in Mulan had a reason for being there, and the story would not have worked without them. But in Frozen, the only relevant characters were Anna and Elsa. Let's compare a few. Let's talk the love interest, Shang versus Kristoff. Can Mulan work without Shang? No. Shang is the military leader. He's more than a love interest, he's a teacher. He educates Mulan in warfare. He teaches her how to fight. He encourages Mulan. And he is the one who spares her life and decides her fate when she's found out as a woman. He has an important role to play, even if it's not just saving her life in the traditional sense. You can't have Mulan without Shang, or at least a character like Shang. Kristoff, though, what did he do? Well, he helped show Anna up the mountain and introduce her to the trolls. That's about it. Everything else that happened did not require him necessarily, and frankly, even had she not met Kristoff, Anna might have found her way by meeting Olaf sooner. Kristoff only existed to subvert your expectations. You watched the movie expecting Kristoff to be the one to save Anna, but nope, gotcha, it wasn't supposed to be him. The movie could work just fine without him. Kristoff only existed to play with your expectations. If you removed him from the story, Frozen could still function. What about the villains? Shan Yu versus Hans. Shan Yu may not have been the best written villain, but he was a clear threat and his pride was his motivation. Certainly, he doesn't have much of a backstory, but we understand his goals. He wants to conquer China because he wants to prove his own strength. He presents as a cunning, intelligent, and dangerous individual. He's a villain, and he never pretends to be anything otherwise. He is the thing that gets the story started. Once he shows up in the very first scene to break over the walls, the entire plot is pushed forward. China has to rally to stand against him. This is what moves the plot. He is essential to the story. What about Hans? He too existed to subvert your expectations. He is revealed as a villain in the end without any prior development as one. Sure, he mentions that he has several brothers older than him that would be first in line for the throne, so he knows he'll probably never reach that point, but he never acts like this is a bother for him. He never treats it as something that builds his character. It's just kind of an offhanded remark to establish that this is his motivation. In fact, throughout the entire movie, he acts like a genuinely good guy. Even when Anna isn't around and you could potentially drop the facade, he shows kindness to others. He's supportive, friendly, and everything in between. He only becomes a villain when it's time for the big moment he needs to be. And even when he is revealed to be, it makes so little difference. All he does is prevent Anna from healing, because he doesn't actually love her, and he reveals he was using her. We didn't really need that, though. What I expected to happen was they would meet up and they would kiss, but it doesn't work, revealing that they didn't actually love each other, they just thought they did. This would actually be a very powerful and even thought-provoking message, showing that sometimes the things we consider to be love, like infatuation, aren't real love. It would be something that Anna and Hans both have to feel. Hans was so desperate to feel some kind of gratification or some kind of success because of his brothers that he thought he loved Anna, when in reality he just thought she was pretty. And Anna, just looking for some kind of social connection, some kind of person to cling to, fell in love with the first really attractive guy she met. It wasn't true love. It was just infatuation, and that's actually something kids might actually be questioned about. But no, it's just he's a villain when he didn't need to be. Removing him as a villain and just keeping him as a rival love interest to Kristoff wouldn't have changed a thing. He had no reason to be a villain, and he was barely a threat. He doesn't possess any power, skills, or position to be dangerous. He didn't even shatter Anna with his sword when she turned to ice. He didn't get up to capitalize on the moment when she turned to ice and Elsa was exposed. I mean, what was he waiting for? He just kind of shows up to try and kill Elsa, fails, and then reappears later so that Anna can punch him. I didn't like it. And what about Mushu versus Olaf, the comic relief? Well, Mushu might not have been a necessary addition, but he had clear and understandable goals he wanted to achieve. He had development, as he has to learn as he goes forward, that while his motivations were self-centered, Mulan's were selfless, and he is willing to accept his own failures. Mushu is very selfish. He wants things for himself. He wants to be reestablished as a guardian. And so he goes out only trying to help himself. He does have purpose, though. He tries to teach Mulan how to be a man, how to survive in a world of men. Of course, he doesn't do it well. That's where the comic relief comes in. But we see him develop over time. We see him actually taking steps and making moves to push things forward, like how he pretends to be an officer to force Shang's army into moving forward, which gets the plot rolling. He actually has important roles to play. He even helps to defeat Shan Yu in the end by launching a firework at him. So he has a role. Olaf? His goal is to experience summer heat, which would kill him. It's subverting your expectations again. It's ironic. It's funny. Except he's not consistent with it. He acts like he doesn't know what melting is, but when Anna reveals he's melting from the fire, he says some people are worth melting for, implying he does know, and it doesn't make sense that he would, because it contradicts his goal. Very confusing. He had no purpose in the story either. He was revealed in order to show Anna where Elsa was, but again, she didn't necessarily need him. She was going the right way with Kristoff's help anyway. Not only this, but after that, he only exists to be funny, to help remind Anna what love is, which, did she really need that? I feel like she could have figured that out herself after Hans's betrayal. And then he just doesn't do anything else. Again, you can have Frozen without Olaf, but it's much harder to have Mulan without Mushu. This is why Mulan was ranked higher, because Frozen tried to push a message and wrapped a story around it. Sure, you can take a similar message from Mulan, but it's clear the story came first. Frozen had a clear goal: to subvert your expectations, to create ironic characters and gotcha moments, and to mock typical Disney tropes while creating all new ones. They just wanted to wrap a story around that message, and they did. But the cost was they created a movie that would fade from the public eye when better movies arrived to preach that message better. Mulan, meanwhile, doesn't sacrifice story for a message. Her story is well layered. It's carefully crafted with characters that are thought out, dynamic, and essential to the story, and a plot built around conflicting interests, goals, and, while maybe a bit cliche in some places, and a bit cringe in others, still maintains a relevant place in the hearts of its audience. Hence why so many voted for it as one of their favorites. In fact, I'd argue that the new Mulan live-action movie tried to do exactly what Frozen did: push a hard female power message rather than create an entertaining story. And it drove everyone back to the original movie just to prove why it's the superior film. Frozen and the Star Wars sequels will fade further in time. Mulan will not. Beauty and the Beast will not. The Little Mermaid will not. And the original Star Wars trilogy will not. Why? Because strong stories are art that we read and see, and good art is timeless. That's the difference between the art of a story and the failings of a propaganda piece. As a final consideration before I go, allow me to offer you a question. We know figures like Michelangelo, Leonardo da Vinci, Van Gogh, Pablo Picasso, Ludwig van Beethoven, Mozart, Bach. Sure, these are all great classical artists of music and art. Tell me, can you name many famous modern artists and their work? I'm not talking about rock bands or movie directors. No. I mean modern, new age, progressive artists. There's a museum near where I live that me and my brother went to go to one time. It was filled with modern art. I can't tell you a dang thing about it other than it looked weird. I have no respect for modern art, because quite often modern art is doing exactly what Frozen and the Star Wars sequel series is doing. They said, we want to portray this specific message, and we'll wrap an art or piece around it. And people will be so enamored by that message, they won't care that the art is bad. That's fine for a little while, until people start seeing through it, or new stuff comes along to tell it better. Food for thought. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you in my next video.